And that nuclear industry is involved not just in the potential for nuclear catastrophes, it's involved in the unresolved high-level nuclear waste issues and the unresolved nuclear waste issues right throughout the nuclear fuel chain. It's involved in the potential for weapons and waste, potential for weapons to continue to reproduce and to be used in future, because all of the countries that hold and reserve the right to use nuclear weapons are failing in their obligations to disarm. They're failing in their obligations to honour the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they are all effectively looking to modernise their nuclear arsenals over time. And some are involved in very particular potential nuclear arms races, whether that's between India and Pakistan, whether it's the long-standing Cold War between the West and the East, whether it's the rising influence and role that China may take, whether it's in third player other countries coming through and developing capacity with Australia's support for nuclear power plants and using that dual-use capacity to reserve the right to produce, to build the capacity to reserve the right to develop nuclear weapons in future. And we're involved in some very strange business in that. You know, Howard sold uranium to China. China's not democratic, China's not transparent. You don't have little public meetings like this about nuclear projects in China, because most people would be itemised by the security police there and they'd get a tap on the shoulder, later at some point in their time. If you want to canvass these sort of views openly there. They don't have public environmental impact statements in China. China and potentially India are the only places in the world looking for major nuclear expansion. And one of the reasons China can look to do that is they don't have public accountability to have to deal with there. They don't have to explain what would go on with the potential for nuclear accidents. They don't have an issue with accountability in terms of nuclear insurance in China. And effectively there is no nuclear insurance anywhere in the world. It's all capped and limited in the Western countries. So the potential for the accident such as Fukushima or an potential accident in the US or elsewhere, that the impacts of that accident would be taken by the public and by the governments. Not that to be compensated through insurance would be any recompense for a nuclear disaster in terms of your livelihood and your health and your environment. But there isn't even any nuclear insurance in any credible sense anywhere in the world. And there certainly isn't going to be in China, where Howard sold uranium and where Labor, when they came to federal office, chose not to disapprove of that arrangement. They left it as it was. Howard did a deal with Putin to sell uranium to Russia. Federal Labor passed that through and formalised that and ratified that uranium sales deal. It's a Labor's responsibility that we're now lined up to sell uranium to Putin's Russia. A lot of interests want to sell uranium to India. Now, India is, while they do speak English and play cricket and are a friendly democratic country in many respects, they're also locked in a nuclear arms race with Pakistan. They also face one of the highest terrorist risks in India, certainly for any democratic country and for broadly in any countries in general. When Japan couldn't demonstrate responsibility for the potential inherent dangers of nuclear technology and nuclear power plants, how can we expect the developing world to do that? Why? How can they have that capacity when we in the West have chosen not to exercise that responsibility? India is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. India is not a signatory to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. India reserves the right to test weapons again in the future. India reserves the right to continue to develop its nuclear arsenal, as other nuclear powers do. Why would we be looking to sell uranium to India? But Federal Labor, at least Federal Minister Martin Ferguson, probably behind the scenes many in the Cabinet, would prefer to sell uranium to India. And in December they have a national conference and they may delete the wording in the conference that says Australia will only sell uranium to countries that observe the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's what some of them wish to do. But it's not just, we need to be really clear, it's not just people such as Minister Martin Ferguson who cop a lot of flack for being so pro-mining and so pro-uranium and so pro-nuclear. They do this on behalf of the cabinets and the leaders, the prime ministers and the premiers. When you see a minister out there strongly speaking in favour of the nuclear industry, they're largely doing that with support of the cabinet and the government overall. They may be playing a particular role on behalf of the team in that respect, and they position themselves as the bad cop and let the good cops go and talk about something else. But that responsibility is shared across the government. It's not just with individual ministers who doggedly pursue nuclear interests. Foreign Affairs Minister Kevin Rudd wants to sell uranium to the United Arab Emirates. Just before the Fukushima nuclear disaster, he announced Australia's intention to have a nuclear cooperation agreement with the United Arab Emirates so that we can sell uranium to the Middle East. Now that's obviously a stable democratic regime in region. The United Arab Emirates is just across the shore from Iran's nuclear weapons program. It's just neighbouring countries such as Bahrain, where they jailed the doctors and the nurses for 15 years and tried to repair the wounds of the democratic demonstrators who had the temerity to get out in the street and say, couldn't we have a right to say here? These are the sort of governments that Kevin Rudd wants to sell uranium to. And he said in his media release that this would be for the commercial interests of Australia's uranium-producing companies. We don't actually have uranium-producing companies. We have BHP and Rio Tinto, two of the world's largest mining companies. Yes, that's true. It's for their interests that Kevin Rudd is over in the Middle East. Much of his overseas tours were around the Middle East, promoting potential for future Australian uranium cells. And he said it should be a model. What we intend to do with the Iota Agreement should be a model for Australian uranium cells across the Middle East. That's the level of geopolitical, strategic, foreign affairs sense that Australia's government support, Labor and Liberal, for the uranium sector actually makes when you come down to it. Selling to China, Russia, breaching all the nuclear treaties to look to try and sell to India, locked in an arms race with Pakistan, looking to sell into that democratic, quiet region in the Middle East, being uncritical of Israel's continued nuclear weapons program and continued threat of use of nuclear weapons against its neighbours. That's the style of foreign policy that we have, that is largely influenced, for whatever reason, by the interests, the best interests of the uranium mining companies. And it's those broad issues that we need to get our heads and handles around as a democratic society if we want to redress where BHP and people like Premier Rand and others want to take our society and take the state. We don't wish to be responsible for those ongoing nuclear risks, such as been demonstrated at Fukushima. We don't wish to have responsibility for unresolved nuclear waste right throughout the nuclear fuel chain. We don't want to be a party to fueling the next potential nuclear catastrophe or the potential for nuclear war or terrorism. And it could well be that it is a nuclear power plant in a country that has ticked all the other boxes. It could be a nuclear power plant in a country that is democratic, that doesn't have nuclear weapons, that claims that they have, an inspection regime, that has some transparency. Terrorists can blow that reactor up just as well as they can blow up a reactor in a country that doesn't tick some of those supposed benefits and boxes. All of those nuclear power plants are fundamentally, unacceptably dangerous, pre-positioned weapons. And until we get a head around that dual-use potential for catastrophe and boiling water to produce electricity, then we're not going to be able to cut through the mining interests or cut through the political support or get any significant role and play in terms of where we would want energy and climate policy to go. And there is very little prospect of the South Australian government taking any serious, honest view to have South Australia commit to real climate change targets by 2020 when they're looking to give one company for one project the right to blow out our total emissions by in the order of 12%. So there are much broader audiences than just those who have concern, those who do hold concern about international responsibilities, about nuclear risks, about the rights and interests of traditional owners to occupy their culture and their country without the imposition of mining and uranium mining and related terms and responsibility for uranium taken from their country to potentially cause impacts elsewhere. You have to get to a broader pool of people to recognise that it's a democratic issue in Australia, that we shouldn't be a party to those risks, that it shouldn't be taken from here to impose those risks elsewhere. And if we're ever to play our role as the big Australian, a dirty Australian in terms of uranium sales and coal sales, and increasingly of LPG and other types of gas sales, if we're ever going to recognise our role in climate change, it won't be through hawking uranium to suit the public relations emissions of the major mining companies, the nuclear corporations, to claim that they too can boil water with it, never mind that it may well blow up.